I woke up to find my obituary on the front page of the Maple Harbor Chronicle. It was a Thursday in late January, a Vermont morning with a sky the color of dishwater and snow stacked in drifts against the porch rails. I had just set my kettle to boil and was standing in my robe by the kitchen window, warming my hands around a ceramic mug, when the carrier's truck idled by and tossed the paper on my step. The headline didn't register right away. I scanned stories about a school board meeting and a local hockey championship and a bake sale to benefit the firehouse. I turned the page, and there it was, under a small photograph of me from our church directory 2 years ago, in loving memory of Margaret L. Reed, 64. I read it 3 times before the words made sense. Beloved wife of the late Daniel Reed, devoted mother to Lydia Crowell, a memorial service to be held Saturday at Harbor Chapel, 2 p.m. Flowers may be sent to... I took a breath that didn't quite fill my lungs. The kettle screamed on the stove, a shrill alarm that startled me hard enough to slosh water onto the linoleum. I set the mug down and pressed my thumb against the photo in the paper as if I could smudge myself out. I was not dead. My kitchen smelled like toast. My slippers were damp. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked once and went quiet. None of it felt like an emergency, but the obituary did not say mistake, did not say correction to follow. It said, I was gone, and it printed the church I had attended with my husband for 35 years. I called the Chronicle first. The editor on duty, an exhausted-sounding 20-something who told me her name was Kira, stammered apologies and put me on hold, then came back and said the notice had been submitted and paid for by a family member. Your daughter, she read from the screen, Lydia Crowell. She said Lydia had provided the photo and the service details, and a lovely sentence about my quiet faith, lemon bars at potlucks, and the hand-sewn quilts that warmed many lives. Kira asked if I wanted to run a retraction. I didn't know how to answer. I said I would get back to her. I called Lydia. She answered on the second ring with a chirpy, breathy, "Hi, Mom," like I'd interrupted her in the middle of a laugh. For a moment, I thought I'd made some laughable error and that she'd explain everything, some ghastly mix-up involving another Margaret. "The paper printed my obituary," I said. "It says I'm dead." There was a beat of silence on the line. Then, in that careful tone she saves for misunderstandings she wants to make mine, she said, "No, Mom. You're looking at last week's paper. I dropped off groceries on Friday, remember? I put the recycling out. You probably set an old paper aside and forgot, this is today's paper." I read her the date. She sighed, annoyed as if I'd caught her in a lie so small it didn't even deserve a good excuse. "Well, then I don't know. Newspapers make mistakes. Please don't get worked up, okay? It's not good for your heart. My heart was fine. It was the steady, practical organ of a woman who had taught second graders for 38 years and who still made lists in a little spiral notebook before she went to bed. It had outlived my husband's heart by 3 winters now. It had survived Thanksgiving without him and the quiet afterward. It had survived Lydia's big, breezy solutions. Sell the house. Move to a condo in Portland near us. I'll manage your bills. It'll be easier. It had survived my polite number, but it stuttered over my own name in newsprint. "Lydia," I said, "the obituary says there's a service at Harbor Chapel on Saturday." "That's impossible." She was rustling through something, keys or papers. "Look, I'm walking into a meeting. I'll swing by this afternoon and we'll sort it out. Wait for me before you call anyone else, okay? Don't get upset." She hung up. I stood at the counter with the phone in my hand and watched the steam curl off the kettle. On the chair by the mudroom door sat the tote bag Lydia had brought last week, packed with 3 days' worth of microwave meals and a 6-pack of protein shakes and a pharmacy's worth of pill organizers. She'd arranged the bottles in a plastic tray and labeled them for me, morning, noon, night, as if I were a kindergartner. I took my calcium and my blood pressure medication. I did not take the little white pill she had begun to call my memory helper, because it made me woozy and slow and left me with a metallic taste in my mouth for the rest of the day. When I went to set the empty mug in the sink, I saw there was more mail in the slot by the door, oversized envelopes that had been wedged at an angle. I pulled them out and sorted them. One was a flyer for gutter cleaning. One was from my electric cooperative. One, in curious formal type, was addressed to the estate of Margaret L. Reed. I slit it with a butter knife. The logo on the letterhead read, North Shield Mutual Life. The letter was dated Tuesday. It expressed condolences on my passing and explained that the company had initiated the claims process for policy NS2 84751 under the beneficiary designation on file. It informed the recipient, my estate allegedly, that an assigned investigator would contact my executor to verify documentation of my death. I read it twice. Then I read it again. There it was, plain as the blue Vermont sky I could not see through the heavy clouds. Someone had told a life insurance company that I was dead. I don't remember walking to the window, but I remember what I saw when I got there. The lake, long and gray and half frozen, the little white church steeple above the firs, and Tom Jensen, my neighbor, in his green parka with the orange knit cap, standing by his mailbox, looking up at my house with his head tilted as if listening for a sound he could not name. Tom moved here last spring with his beagle, Penny. He told me he used to be a postal inspector, the guy who looked into stolen credit cards and mail fraud, and those porch pirates people complain about on the local Facebook page. He's the sort of man who notices everything. He's also, in the gentlest way, nosy. It is a combination I have come to appreciate. I slipped on my boots and went out. "Morning, Margaret," he called, and then his voice softened when he saw my face. "Everything okay?" I handed him the letter from North Shield. He read it and whistled softly. "The estate of," he said. "Well, that's a new one even for me." "And the paper," I said, holding up the Chronicle. "An obituary. A service at Harbor Chapel." He unfolded the paper. He looked at the photo. His beagle sat at his feet and wagged once, twice, then settled onto the snow as if sensing the stillness in us. Tom's eyes moved over the paragraphs and back to the top. He glanced at me. "Who would send this in?" "My daughter," I said, "apparently." "Why would she—" He stopped, not finishing the question anyone would ask. The answer was not a thing you say out loud about a daughter you raised to be honest and brave and good with money. The answer was more than money. It was a small life lived neatly that someone else had begun to fold for me. "Lydia said it was a mistake," I told him. "She said she'd come by later." Tom took the letter back out of the envelope, turned it over even though there was nothing on the back, and slid it in again. "Do you have a policy?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Daniel took one out when he started the sales job with Pine Country Appliances back in the 80s. It paid out when he died. I had a smaller one for my teaching union. I don't know if it's still in force. I tried to remember the last time I looked at any of those papers. After Daniel's funeral, I put everything in the cedar chest at the foot of our bed, the one that still smelled faintly of his wool sweaters in the damp. "Lydia has been managing my accounts," I said. "She said the automatic payments were easier if she consolidated things." Tom's eyes focused. "Consolidated?" "She moved my checking into a joint account. She said it was temporary, just to help me until I decided what to do about the house. She set up online access." I heard how foolish I sounded as I said it, and I hated that. "Tom, I may be widowed and 64, but I am not helpless. I can write a check." But after Daniel died, there was so much to learn at once. Lydia wanted to help. She had spreadsheets and passwords and a binder with tabs. "Does she have your social security card? Your driver's license?" he asked. "I think so," I said. "She took my wallet a few months ago to organize it. It came back slimmer." Tom looked out toward the lake, then back at me. I could see him deciding how blunt to be. "I'll be delicate, Simad," he said, which meant he would be blunt. "It is possible for someone with your information and a power of attorney to initiate a claim. It is not possible to be legally dead without a death certificate, but people do forge documents. I saw 2 cases in Maine last year where children reported their parents deceased to cash out small pensions. It wasn't common, it wasn't easy, but it happened." He paused. "I don't want to worry you. I want you to be prepared." "Thank you," I said, and my voice came out thinner than I liked. Would you mind coming by when Lydia arrives?" "I'd be honored," he said. "And Margaret?" "Yes." "Do not sign anything today." Not a single sheet. Not even a cookie recipe, I smiled in spite of the sickness in my stomach. Okay. He tapped 2 fingers to his orange cap, the old-fashioned courtesy of a man from another time, and walked back to his house with Penny trotting at his heel. I watched them go. Then I went inside, closed the door with the weight of the January world behind it, and stood in my kitchen, staring at my own face in the obituary as though she were a stranger in a coat I might try on and decide did not suit me. That afternoon, the sky lowered and the snow began in earnest, fat flakes that floated and clung. Lydia's car pulled into my driveway a few minutes after 3. She stepped out in a camel hair coat and ankle boots that were wrong for the weather and trotted up the walk like an anchor woman who had a train to catch. Her hair was perfect. Her eyes scanned my porch and my windows as if taking measurements. "Mom," she said brightly, sweeping me into a hug that smelled faintly of expensive citrus. "You look great. How are you feeling?" "Like I read my own obituary," I said. She laughed, a brittle sound. "I told you, newspapers make mistakes. It's practically their brand." I handed her the letter from North Shield. She read it. Her expression did not change. "Well," she said and set it on the counter. "That explains the paper." "It does?" I asked. "They probably got their wires crossed, like when a hospital calls the wrong family. The insurance company must have sent a notification, so the paper assumed, whatever. It's not a big deal." "A letter to my estate is not a big deal," I said, and I heard my teacher voice there. Calm even, the tone I used in conferences with defensive parents who tried to tell me their child hadn't pushed on the playground, even when I'd seen it with my own eyes. "Mom," Lydia's smile went tight, "you're spiraling. This is what the little white pill is for. Did you take it today? Because it helps with the anxiety." "I did not," I said. "Lydia, I am not confused." "Someone told a life insurance company I am dead." She leaned into me, lowering her voice. "I told them you were terminal." I stared at her. "You what?" "It's a standard notice to get pre-approval for certain benefits." She tossed her purse onto my table and began to open drawers as if looking for a spoon. "They can expedite advance directives. It makes things smoother later. You want your daughter to be proactive, right? You want me helping you?" "I am not terminal," I said. "It's not like I told them you dropped dead in the produce aisle at Hannaford. It's a checkbox on a form. Sometimes it's easier for them to move a claim into pending before a death, so there aren't delays when families are grieving." She said all this as if she knew everything about the insurance business, and as if that business were designed to be navigated by daughters like her. "Why would you be filing anything?" I asked. And then I realized what I had not let myself consider. Who is the beneficiary on my policy? She looked at me as if I'd asked who the president was. "Me, obviously. You added me last year. Remember? You said it made sense. It avoids probate." "I don't remember adding you," I said. She flipped open her binder, the one she kept in her bag, with the tabs labeled in her neat handwriting. Banks, utilities, medical, legal, insurance. She slid a paper out and held it up. A change of beneficiary form with my name printed carefully, my signature or something like my signature at the bottom. "There," she said, tapping the page with a manicured nail. "Where did you get my signature, Lydia?" She spared me the performance. She shrugged, a small tilt of one shoulder as if the truth were a pebble on the road you stepped over without thinking. "It's a formality. It's what you wanted." The kitchen clock clicked to the next minute. The house seemed to lean, an old barn in a wind, but it held. There was a knock at the back door. Lydia's eyes flicked to the mudroom with irritation she didn't bother to hide. "Expecting someone?" she asked. "I asked Tom to stop by," I said. "For tea." Lydia's smile reappeared, tight polite. "Wonderful," she whispered. "Don't make me the bad guy in front of your neighbor." "That's not fair." Mom Tom stamped the snow from his boots on the mat and took off his cap. "Good to see you, Lydia," he said, in the friendly way men of his era talk to women they do not entirely trust. "You too," she said. Her voice sugared again, and offered him a handshake she did not mean. He saw the letter on my counter. He had the gift of making his eyes look casually uninterested when they were assessing a crime scene. "I brought lemon muffins," he announced. My daughter mailed me a mix from some place in Oregon. She said it would make me bake like a hipster. He set the tin on the table. If we die happy. Don't joke about death, I said before I could stop myself, and then I laughed, a small, ridiculous sound that made my shoulders relax. We sat. Lydia politely declined the muffin. Tom accepted, took a bite, and with the deliberation of an old investigator laying down a piece of evidence, said, "Margaret showed me the notice from North Shield." Lydia folded her hands where Tom could see how steady they were. "I've already told my mother there's been a misunderstanding." "I'm taking care of it. North Shield says an investigator will be in touch," Tom said. "Wonderful," Lydia said. "I adore investigators. They always have such helpful questions." Tom's eyes moved to me. I met them. I said, "I would like to be present for any conversation about my life and my death." Lydia's jaw tightened. She kept her smile. "Of course you would," she said. She checked her watch. "I have to get back to the office." She kissed my cheek with her lips barely touching my skin. "We'll talk soon." To Tom, with the sparkle of a woman raised to run a room, "Lovely to see you." She was out the door before I could ask her anything else, boots clicking on the porch, coat flaring behind her like a ship heading for open sea. Tom watched her drive away. He did not gloat, and I loved him a little for that. He poured us both tea and slid the cupcake tin closer to me. "We're going to need to be practical," he said, voice low and kind. "First, your financials. We separate what you can control from what she can. Second, your identification. We secure originals. Third, we document everything. Dates, times, who said what. If she is filing fraudulent paperwork, there will be a slip. Scammers always get lazy somewhere." "How do you know she's a scammer and not just—" I couldn't bring myself to say careless. He tilted his head. "I don't know anything yet." "That's why we keep our heads cool and our notes neat." He looked toward my living room, where a framed photo of Daniel sat on the mantel, his arm around me on our 40th anniversary, his mustache too big for the fashion of the day and his smile too big for the frame. "What would your husband say right now?" "He'd clean the driveway," I said. "He always plowed when he was worried." "Then let's shovel," Tom said, which was his way of saying, "Let's work." That evening, a small white SUV idled at the end of my driveway for longer than a driver might pause to check a text. Tom, who had taken Penny out for her last walk, stood in the road and stared. The SUV rolled on. He knocked on my door a minute later and said he'd sleep with the porch light on. The next morning, I got a call from a woman who introduced herself as Hannah Park with North Shield Mutual Life. Her voice was neat and calm, like the edges of a carefully made bed. She said she was assigned to verify documentation for an active claim on policy NS284751. She said she realized it was an odd ask, given I was the policyholder. She laughed gently at her own line. "We've had glitches," she said. "I wondered if we could set a time to meet." "Here," I said, "at my house." Today is perfect," she said. "I'm in the county until noon." I made coffee. I tidied the living room in that way that is half cleaning and half creating an impression of a life well ordered. Hannah arrived bundled in a sensible parka and boots with salt stains at the seams. She introduced herself to Tom first. He told her he used to be a postal inspector. She smiled but did not treat him like a colleague. She treated him like a neighbor, which was exactly right. We sat at my table. Hannah laid out a small tablet, a leather folio, and a pen that looked like it was designed to impress people who noticed pens. "I'll start by saying I am very sorry," she said. "If this is a clerical error, it is an egregious one. If it is not, we have procedures." She glanced up at me. "Are you comfortable with your neighbor present?" "Yes," I said. "Okay." She swiped her tablet and pulled up a document. "We received a notice of death last week from Lydia Crowell, identified as your daughter and beneficiary. She provided a copy of your death certificate and a notarized affidavit. She requested expedited release of funds due to a mortgage payoff and imminent medical bills. She included account numbers for disbursement. My death certificate," I repeated. "Signed by whom?" "Dr. Roger Hinshaw," she said, and the name of our town's old family physician sounded like a joke told at the wrong time in the wrong room. Dr. Hinshaw retired 2 years ago, I said. He lives in Florida. Hannah nodded as if she had expected that. She slid a paper out of the folio, a printed copy of the alleged certificate. It bore the seal of the Maple County clerk and the stamp of our local funeral home. It listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest, natural causes. It listed the date as last Tuesday. It listed my address, my social security number, the place where I was allegedly found, residence, and the name of the funeral director who had assisted with arrangements, which was a name I recognized because the boy had been in my class 25 years ago and had grown up to take over his father's funeral home. Kyle Shepard. "Do you mind if I call the funeral home?" Hannah asked. "Please," I said. She stepped onto the porch to make the call. Tom kept his voice a whisper. "Kyle is a good kid," he said. "Well, not a kid. But I know," I said, and drew a box around my fear and placed it neatly on the shelf beside the salt. Hannah returned in a minute. "I spoke with Mr. Shepard," she said. "He says he did not sign this. He did not file this. He says he has not assisted your family since your husband's funeral. He's already calling the clerk's office to flag the seal. He was very emphatic," I imagined Kyle, with the same earnest mouth he had as a boy, arguing with the clerk until his face went red. Hannah tapped her pen against her notebook. 1, 2, 3. "Ms. Reed," she said, "do you have a secure place for your original documents? Birth certificate? Social security card? Deed?" "In the cedar chest," I said. "May I see?" We went upstairs. The house was quiet in the way houses are quiet when you've lived in them for 4 decades. I lifted the lid of the chest and took out the folder where I had kept everything that mattered after Daniel died. The deed to our house, our marriage certificate, birth certificates for me and for Lydia. I felt like a thief opening my own life. The pocket where my social security card should have been was empty. I thought I had put it in the little fireproof box in the back of my closet. I hadn't. Or I had, and it wasn't there now. Hannah kept her face still. "Do you have a safe deposit box?" she asked. "No," I said. "Okay," she said softly. "We'll fix that." She closed the folder and looked at me with a steadiness that felt like a hand on my shoulder. "Ms. Reed, I believe a fraudulent claim has been initiated on your policy. We will freeze disbursement. We will notify our legal department and the State Insurance Bureau. In the meantime, I recommend you talk to the sheriff and to an elder law attorney. Your daughter may attempt to move on other assets." "She already has," I said. "My checking. I swallowed. Whatever minor things I let her manage because it seemed efficient. "It always seems efficient," Hannah said, "right up until it doesn't." After she left, Tom and I went to the bank. He brought his own folder with papers in it because men like him cannot go to a bank without a folder. We sat with a branch manager named Darla, who wore a cardigan and a ring with a stone the size of a blueberry, and listened to me explain that I needed to separate my account from the joint one Lydia had set up. Darla pursed her lips in that way women do when they are trying to be empathetic, while also not quite believing that a daughter would do something so bald. Then she began typing. She printed out a form, slid a pen across the desk, and looked at me as if the pen were heavier than it looked. "I'll need 2 forms of identification," she said. "Driver's license and social security card." My driver's license was in my wallet. My social security card was not in my house. Darla suggested we could proceed with a birth certificate if I had a passport. I did not. Tom coughed. "You can file a fraud alert without moving the accounts," he said to Darla in his just this side of civil voice. "You can monitor and freeze transactions pending investigation." Darla blinked. "That's a possibility." She looked at her computer like she was hoping it would argue with Tom so she wouldn't have to. Then she typed again and a different form appeared. We placed a hold. We left with nothing separated and everything on watch. That night, Lydia called and spoke in the chilly voice of a woman who believes she is still in control. "I heard an insurance lady came by," she said. "Why would you call them, Mom? Do you know how embarrassing this is? They probably think I'm some kind of—" She stopped herself in time. "I didn't call them," I said. "They called me." "Well, I told you I would handle this," she said. "Now there's a mess I have to clean up." "We'll discuss it tomorrow. And Mom, you need to take your memory helper. You're not yourself, I'm entirely myself, I said, and I hung up before I could say something I would regret. 3 days passed. The snow kept falling as if that were its job, which it was. Tom shoveled his driveway twice a day because that was his way. I made soups and set bowls on the porch for him and Penny because that was mine. I replaced the bulbs in my motion lights. I taped a note inside my kitchen cabinet with the list of people I was allowed to let into my house. Tom, Hannah, Deputy Claire from the sheriff's office who had come by and promised to keep an eye on my street, even if it was mostly for show, Ruthie from church, and my own lonely courage. On the 4th day, while I was sitting at my table reading the Chronicle with my obituary now corrected, the Chronicle regrets an error, there was a sharp knock. Not tentative, but official. A man in a navy peacoat held a clipboard in one hand and the brim of his cap in the other. Behind him, a woman in scrubs stood with a polite smile. "Mrs. Reed?" the man asked. "I'm Greg Evans." "I'm with Maple County Guardianship Services. We're here to do a brief wellness evaluation." "I didn't request one," I said. "Your daughter did," he said smoothly. "She's concerned you may be experiencing cognitive decline." "That must be why I wrote my obituary," I said, before I could stop the quip. Greg's smile didn't change. "May we come in?" "No," I said. His eyebrows rose. "I can request a wellness check through the sheriff's office and return with a deputy." "Please do," I said, because courage, once you try it, is like a muscle that wants to lift more. "And bring my daughter some. I'll bake." I closed the door gently. I called Tom. He called Deputy Claire. She came by in her cruiser and sat at my kitchen table and called Greg Evans back and said, on speakerphone because she's a decent woman who knows how to handle men like him. We don't do determinations at the behest of an adult child with an active financial interest. If there's an emergency, call 911. Otherwise, back off. It was satisfying, like watching a strong friend lift a thing you didn't think was possible. That afternoon, Hannah called. She had sent North Shield's legal packet to the state investigators and to the district attorney. She asked if I had received any new contact from my daughter. I told her about the guardianship man. Hannah's voice didn't change. "That's a tactic," she said. "It's meant to intimidate." "Document it. If anyone tries to move you into a facility, call me from the car. I will call the DEA. "Is that legal?" I asked. "It's not," she said, "but it's done." At 3, Lydia arrived with her husband. I do not like to say my son-in-law's name if I can help it. It tastes like pennies, but for the sake of clarity, I will say it. Owen. He used to be an adjuster for a regional insurance carrier in New Hampshire. He left that job 2 years ago, which is to say he was let go, though the story shifts depending on who is telling it. He now calls himself a consultant. He looks like a man who would be delighted to sell you a boat he did not own. He smiled at me with all his teeth. "Mom," Lydia said, sweeping in with her coat open as if she had never been cold in her life, "you've created an absolute headache." North Shield is calling everyone. The Chronicle keeps emailing me for a statement. Kyle from the funeral home left me a rude voicemail. "Why would you do this?" "Why would I do which part?" I asked. "Fail to die on your schedule? Or tell the truth that I am alive?" "You don't understand how these things work," she said tightly. "You sign a couple forms in advance, so when the time comes, we're not scrambling." It's standard. It's not illegal. Owen put a hand on the back of Lydia's chair in a gesture I would have liked to slap. "Let's be adults," he said. "This is a paperwork issue, not a moral one." "It's a felony," I said, and the word sounded so large in my kitchen that Penny, under the table, raised her head. Lydia and Owen laughed at the same time, the rehearsed duet of people who have told the same lie so often they have turned it into a song. "Mom," Lydia said, gentler, "you like things to be organized." "Let me organize." "That's all this is." "No," I said, and I did not give the word room to falter. She cocked her head, genuinely confused. "No?" "No," I repeated. "No more forms. No more signatures. No more pills that make me feel slow. No more guardianship men at my door. No more pretending I am not here. I am here. The air moved, as air does when people decide which version of themselves to be next. Owen tried a new approach. He softened his eyes and lowered his voice. "Margaret," he said, "there are ways for all of us to win. If we withdraw the claim, the company will probably flag you as problematic. They'll freeze things. There may be questions when you actually pass. I'm suggesting I am not discussing my actual passing," I said. "Not with you in my kitchen. Not with you anywhere." His smile vanished. "You're making this difficult. And you're making this criminal," I said. And suddenly I felt very, very tired, like I had been holding a heavy box against my chest and finally put it down without meaning to. I wanted them to leave. I wanted my living room with its quilts and my kettle with its reasonable whistle and my neighbor with his dog. I was 70% resolve and 30% hunger, and that meant I needed a sandwich more than I needed to win this argument. This is not, perhaps, the heroic turn you're expecting. But I have found that sandwiches rescue as many lives as speeches. Tom knocked softly on the back door and let himself in because we had agreed before they arrived that he would check on me every hour and err on the side of protective nosiness. He saw Lydia's posture and Owen's face and said, "Everything good here?" with a smile that did not move his eyes. "Everything is fine," Owen said, which is the sentence that tells you nothing is fine. "It's not," I said. "They're leaving." Lydia stood. "We'll be back with paperwork." "And a deputy," Tom said pleasantly, "so you can hand the paperwork to her." They left with their coats unbuttoned and their noses red. Snow squeaked under their shoes like styrofoam. I made a sandwich. Tom took a bite and said, "Good mustard." The next morning, a skid mark curved in a black sickle through the fresh white on the road in front of my house. At the bottom of the hill, a car was turned sideways against the shoulder. A deputy crouched by the front tire. I recognized the car. It belonged to Leonard Pratt, a lawyer who had lived in town as long as I had, and who had represented Dolores Hardy when her son tried to clean out her CD after she fell and broke her hip. Tom and I had left a message on Leonard's machine 2 nights ago asking if he could advise me on a few legal questions. He had called back and said, "Come by Friday. We'll fix all of it." It was Friday. Leonard did not die. He was taken to the hospital. He had a concussion and a broken wrist. It was a patch of black ice. The deputy said, "It was a deer. It was the wrong tires for this hill. It was the way life is when it wants to remind you that it can tilt any minute and spill your careful tea." Hannah called from the road. "We have enough for the DA to open a case," she said. "We need recorded proof of intent. It will be stronger if we hear them admit what they did." "How would we ever get that?" I asked. Tom leaned toward the receiver and said, "Leave that to us," which terrified me because I knew that when retired investigators say leave that to us, they mean I will do something that gets me in just enough trouble to be fun. We did not plant bugs or go on a commando mission. Tom has a teenage granddaughter who taught him how to set up a phone in a tissue box. We put the box on my mantle. Tom called Lydia and told her I was wavering, that I wanted to apologize for overreacting, that I would talk about the forms if she promised to come alone. She arrived looking like contrition in a scarf. She sat on my couch. The tissue box listened. I asked her very simply, "Why did you file the claim, Lydia?" She said, "Because it is what you would have wanted." Because it is easier to settle an account than to wait, I asked whether Owen had helped. She said, "He did the forms." "He always does the forms," I asked. "Did you forge my signature?" She said, "Do you not remember signing it?" I said, "No." She said, "Then let it be that you don't remember and not that I did it, because they charge more for that." Tom sent the audio file to Hannah and to Deputy Claire. Claire came over with a warrant. They arrested Lydia at her office. Owen was picked up in the parking lot with a briefcase full of things that do not belong in a briefcase. Checklists of beneficiary accounts, lists of senior citizens with policies at North Shield and other companies, and a thumb drive that would later contain 24 templates for death certificates from 4 different states. Within a day, the Chronicle ran a new headline: "Daughter, son-in-law charged in alleged insurance fraud scheme." I was a paragraph in the middle of the story. The mother, who is alive, declined to comment. I did not decline. I simply had nothing to say to a paper that had published me dead and then apologized in a font so small I needed my reading glasses. I wish I could tell you that is when I slept. I did not. The night after the arrests, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The voice was my daughter's, squeezed thin by fury. "How could you?" she whispered. "Do you know what you've done? Do you have any idea what they will dig up now?" I didn't. Not then. But in stories like this, there is always a second act. Abusers rarely surrender their weapons. They sharpen new ones. 2 days later, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside were photocopies of documents I had not seen in years. The receipt for the last Social Security check that came after Daniel died. The one I deposited because I did not know I had to return it. The cash withdrawal I made that same week to pay for the furnace repair that had to be done before the pipes burst. The email I had sent to my sister, mentioning both, asking her if that was okay, and her reply, "I don't know, ask Lydia." I had not asked Lydia because she had not returned my calls that week. She and Owen had been on a cruise. There was a note written in my daughter's looping, pretty hand. "If you don't withdraw your complaint, I will make sure everyone knows your sins. You always told me to tell the truth. Let's tell it." I took the envelope to Tom. He read it and did not look at me with judgment. He looked at me like he had expected this. "What did you do with that Social Security check?" he asked gently. "I deposited it," I said. "I didn't know you had to send it back." I found out a month later and tried to call the office, and the line was always busy. Then someone told me it would be fine because I was barely getting by and we'd spent it on the furnace. "I am not a criminal, Tom." "I know," he said. "Sometimes ordinary life is a tangle, and the rules are needles." Hannah came over in her salt-stained boots and sat with me and Tom in the envelope. "Here's what we do," she said. "We tell the DA before your daughter does. We explain. You repay the amount with whatever penalty they ask. We take every secret she thinks she can use, and we drag it into daylight. I have sat in 1,000 kitchens like this, Miss Reed. The only power blackmail has is the shadow. You turn the light on and it goes flat. So I wrote a statement. I said I had deposited a check in a fog of grief and ignorance. I said I had not meant to break the law. I said I would pay whatever they said I owed. I wrote another statement about the little room we had rented over the garage to a graduate student one fall to help her and to help us, and the cash she had given us because we had not yet gotten a proper lease, and Daniel was always embarrassed to ask for checks. I wrote it not because Lydia had the receipts, she didn't, but because I wanted there to be nothing left for her to hold over me like a shadow puppet. The DA called me into his office. He's a man with a square head and a square jaw and a surprisingly gentle laugh. His name is Greg Morales. He read my statements. He asked me 3 careful questions. Then he said, "I prefer cooperative witnesses to indicted grandmothers." And he smiled. "Pay the Social Security back. As for the rental, that's between you and your conscience and the town assessor, and I suspect they will accept your apology and a check for $60. He slid the blackmail envelope back to me with his finger on the note. "This helps us," he said. "It shows pattern." Not remorse. The hearing came 2 weeks later. The courthouse was a block of beige brick that looked embarrassed by itself. Lydia sat at a table in a pale blue sweater, the same color as the nursery I painted when she was born. She did not look at me when they brought her in. Owen sat beside her in a suit that made him look like a child playing a business game. The prosecutor read the charges: insurance fraud, forgery, filing false documents, attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I took a breath at the words vulnerable adult, as if swallowing something too big. When it was my turn to speak, I stood. The judge said, "You don't have to." Hannah sat 2 rows behind me and nodded as if to say, "You also don't not have to. Courage is like that. Nobody makes you, nobody stops you." "I'm Margaret Reed," I said. "I am not dead." There was a small rustle in the courtroom. It is not often someone begins a statement with that line. I spoke in the voice I used to read Charlotte's Web to a class of 7-year-olds on a rainy afternoon. calm, steady, the slow drip of truth. I told the judge my daughter had filed a claim. I told him my neighbor had helped me think and my investigator had helped me act. I said the most dangerous thing a woman can do is stop doubting her fear. I said I was not here to punish my daughter, but to put a padlock on a door that should not be opened again. When I finished, the courtroom was very quiet. The judge looked at me for a long time. He said he would deny bail. He said the weight of evidence and the pattern of behavior made release risky. He said he was very glad I was alive. That is not in the transcript, but it is in my memory, and you may decide which you trust more. On the way out of the courthouse, a young reporter from Channel 7 approached me with a microphone. She had the eager eyes of someone who has not yet seen enough to be tired. "Mrs. Reed," she said, "is there anything you want to say to other seniors in Vermont who may be worried about their finances?" "Yes," I said. "Tell one person who will believe you, then tell another." She nodded like she would put that on a billboard. She asked if I would sit for an interview. Hannah touched my elbow, the soft pressure of a friend saying, "Not yet." I smiled at the reporter and said, "Maybe soon." Soon turned out to be sooner than I thought. 2 days later, a new envelope came. This time, it was a letter from a lawyer I had never heard of requesting immediate reconsideration of my statements on the grounds that I was emotionally compromised. Attached was a note in Lydia's hand. "You have no idea how deep this goes. Stop." I took the letter to Hannah. She was sitting in the back booth of the diner on Main Street, beneath the painting of the ice fisherman that has hung there since 1979, and that somebody once told me is worth a fortune, and somebody else told me is mediocre. Hannah read the letter and smiled, a small, fierce twist that did not reach her eyes. "They are trying to build doubt," she said. "It's not going to work. And if it does, we can do something they cannot predict." "What's that?" I asked. "Speak loudly," she said. "Publicly." I shook my head. "I am not a television person." "You are exactly a television person," Hannah said. "You are the person every viewer sees and thinks, that could be my mother, that could be me." She slid a card across the formica. "I spoke to a producer at Channel 7. The reporter who stopped you wants to do a live segment on elder financial abuse. She wants to meet you at the studio. She'll keep it controlled. You will say what you want. We will put them on their back foot. You will not be the woman they can paint as confused and quiet. You will be the woman who reads her own obituary and shows up anyway." So I did it. The studio smelled like hairspray and coffee. The anchor adjusted her earpiece and said, "We're coming back in 30 seconds. Like those words meant we had been somewhere out and were now returning to a thing we could all agree was real. The camera light went red. The anchor introduced me. I looked into the black glass eye and told the story you are hearing now, but with fewer digressions and more gratitude. I said the words, "my daughter," and did not cry. I said the word "forgery," and did not stutter. The anchor nodded at the right moments and asked questions that a smart person at home would ask, like, "How did you know to trust the investigator?" And "What do you want other families to know?" And "What did it feel like to see your own obituary?" "Like being erased with a pencil," I said, soft, then gone. But paper remembers the indent where the word was. You can shade it and see the shape again. After the segment, in the glass-walled hallway, my phone vibrated with 6 messages from people I hadn't seen in years. A girl I had taught in 1998 wrote, "Mrs. Reed, I saw you on TV. I always knew you were brave." The minister wrote, "Harbor Chapel is open to you any time for anything that helps." Kyle from the funeral home wrote, "I'm so sorry." I brought over blueberry scones if you're home. That is how we do sympathy here. We bring baked goods and we shovel. Hannah walked beside me in the hallway and smiled with half her mouth. "You took their one power and turned it to ash," she said. I wanted to say I was simply a woman who had gotten stubborn and hungry at the right time, but I let her have her dramatic line. She had earned it. The case did not end there. Cases never do. The state investigators raided an apartment in Concord and found a little factory of forged documents. Printer, seals, templates, names. They found files on 20 seniors in 3 states, some of whom had died, some of whom were a little too close to dead for comfort, and a ledger that connected Owen to a man with a name you would not remember if I told you, because these men always have forgettable names. They found a list of policy numbers that had been flagged because of irregularities, including mine. They found the kind of sloppy mistake Tom predicted they would, an email thread in which Lydia asked, "Will they check the seal?" And the man with the forgettable name replied, "No one checks anything," and added a smiley face. The trial took place in April, when the snow receded from the edges of the lake and left the ground looking raw and surprised. The courtroom was full of people who do not usually know one another. The State Insurance Bureau, the Sheriff's Office, old men in plaid who had never been in a courthouse, young women who had only ever seen courtrooms on TV. Tom sat on the end of a bench with Penny at his feet, because Penny had become my comfort animal even though she belonged to him. Hannah sat behind the prosecution with her tablet and her neat pen. Lydia wore gray. Owen wore navy. The man with the forgettable name wore a smirk until the third witness, when it slid off his face like a snow cap off a roof in a thaw. I testified. I told the truth. When the defense attorney tried to question my faculties by asking what I had eaten the morning I found my obituary, I told him I had burned my toast and that it was an omen I did not honor. And the courtroom laughed and the judge glared and the defense attorney adjusted his tie like he had worn it too tight for years and was only now realizing it. When he asked me whether I had ever made a mistake with my own finances, I said yes and explained how I had repaid Social Security and apologized to the town assessor and lived long enough to know there are mistakes you survive and mistakes you try to survive. The jury looked at me like I was their aunt. Lydia took the stand. She cried. She said the forms were preparatory. She said she had intended to return the money if anything had gone wrong. As if those words could be strung like a net across a ravine after you had already driven the bus over it. The prosecutor played the audio from the tissue box. Lydia's face ached in ways I had not seen since she was a child trying not to admit she'd dropped the vase. Owen took the stand and performed indignation like a man who thinks anger looks better than guilt. He said he was helping my daughter manage a difficult parent. He said he had reviewed industry practices. He said, "Everyone does it." The prosecutor arched an eyebrow and said, "Everyone forges death certificates?" And Owen said, "That's not what I meant." And the jury looked at him like he'd lost his keys. When it was over, the jury deliberated for 3 hours and returned with guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Owen to 8 to 12 years and Lydia to 4 to 7 with eligibility for parole after 2. The man with the forgettable name received 10 to 15 and a long speech from the bench about the difference between clever and cruel. After the hearing, Lydia's lawyer asked if I wanted to speak to her in the holding room. I said yes, because I am not a woman who avoids necessary pain. The sheriff's deputy led me to a narrow room with a cinder block wall painted the color of my least favorite pea soup. Lydia sat in a plastic chair with her hands folded on the table like a student. She looked older than she had 2 months ago. She looked like my girl and she looked like a stranger, and it is a special cruelty of motherhood that both can be true at once. "Mom," she said. I sat. I wanted to fold her hands into mine and tell her I would fix her and the world. I wanted to stand and say, "You are not my daughter." I wanted to talk about the way she looks when she is sleeping, which is like a woman who believes in a world that will hold her. "You put me in jail," she said. It sounded like a line from a play she had been rehearsing. "No," I said, "you put yourself here." She looked at the ceiling as if expecting a line to be written there. When she found none, she said, "I thought I was helping." "When you were 5, I said, "you took $1 from my purse to buy an ice pop during recess. You told me you were helping because I would have wanted you to have one. Do you remember?" She coughed a laugh. "It was orange." "It was," I said. "You were sticky for a week." "I had to wash your hair twice. You told me you'd do it again. You told me you deserved the ice pop because it made you happy, and making you happy made me happy." I let out a breath. I don't know what made you into a woman who thinks what she wants is the same as what is right. But that is not the math I taught you. She looked at my hands and then at my face, and for a second I saw my little girl, the inside part, unarmored. She looked ashamed. She looked sorry. The look lasted a blink. Then the door opened and the deputy said, "Time," and the spell broke, and she put her mask back on. "I hope you're happy," she said. It is a silly line. She said it anyway. "I am alive," I said. "That will have to be enough." Spring came. The snow left. The lake turned the hard blue it turns when the wind lays down. I planted radishes. I ate the first one over the sink with salt. It tasted like a small bite of the sun. Hannah brought me a folder one morning and set it on my table. "North Shield has a community liaison position," she said. "It's 10 hours a week. It's talking to church groups and book clubs and senior centers about recognizing financial abuse. It pays enough to make you feel useful and not enough to make you tired. Would you be interested?" I laughed. "Are there lemon bars?" I asked. "We can negotiate snacks," she said. So I said yes. I went to the Rotary Club and the Methodist potluck and the library on Wednesday afternoons. I talked about durable power of attorney and about trust, and about a kind of love that sinks its teeth in and doesn't want to let go. I said the smartest thing anyone would hear at those events, which is perhaps the only smart thing I have learned since Daniel died. Tell one person, then tell another. I set up a lockbox at the bank for my birth certificate, my deed, the ring Daniel gave me on our 25th. I put the cedar chest back where it belongs at the foot of the bed. I had the locks changed on the house, and I made 3 keys and gave one to Tom. I bought a secondhand kayak from a man whose doctor told him to stop paddling after his hip replacement. I took it out on the lake on a morning, so still you could hear a loon like a bell. I paddled in circles just because I could. In June, Channel 7 called again. The young reporter wanted a follow-up. "Viewers loved you," she said, "and what a strange sentence to hear about yourself, especially after a lifetime of being loved by one man and one child and a classroom at a time." We did another segment in my kitchen. She asked how I was. I told her I was learning to bake bread again because it felt like being useful to a future version of myself who would be hungry. She asked if I had forgiven my daughter. I said forgiveness is not a switch. It is a series of small decisions in a line, and so far I had made enough of them to get to June. In July, a letter arrived with a return address stamped Maple County Correctional Facility. I held it in my kitchen and let the moment be what it was, an invitation to bleed. I took a breath and opened it. It was my daughter's handwriting, still beautiful, still looping. She wrote, "I watched you on TV. You looked happy." She wrote, "I took something from you that I don't know how to give back." She wrote, "Do you still make lemon bars?" I set the letter down. I stood at the counter. I took out my recipe card, the one written in my mother's slanted script. I took out flour and sugar and eggs. I zested a lemon. I thought about the ways we take from each other without meaning to, and the ways we mean to, and the ways they look the same on paper. I put the pan in the oven and set the timer for 25 minutes. When the timer dinged, I dusted powdered sugar across the top and the kitchen looked like February again. And instead of sorrow, it felt like grace. People have asked me in the months since my death and my resurrection what I learned. I do not have a list. I am not a woman for lists anymore. I do have this. I learned that a quiet life is not a small one. I learned that love without boundaries becomes appetite. I learned that you can be erased on paper and still be so alive you can hear your own breath in your ribs. I learned that shame dissolves when you point at it with the right people in the room. I learned that there is a community waiting to show up for you, and all you have to do is say, whisper, squeak, help. Sometimes, early in the morning, I take my kayak out into the cove near our house. The water is glass. The air is that kind of cool that makes you feel like you finally got a sweater that fits. The loons trade sentences in the far reeds. I let the paddle rest across my knees. I sit very still. I think about the obituary on the front page of the paper and the memorial service that never happened, and the lemon bars at the Rotary Club, and the little head tilt Tom does when he is thinking. I think about my daughter as a baby, her fist curling around my finger, and my daughter in a courtroom, her jaw set against Grace, and the letter where she asked about my lemon bars, and the place in me that believes that question is the beginning of her trying to be human again. I am not dead. It is a ridiculous sentence, and a holy one. It is not a metaphor. It is a fact, like the names on a mailbox or the taste of a July tomato. I was declared dead. An investigator found the truth. A neighbor sat at my kitchen table and said, "We'll shovel." A man I honestly dislike went to prison. A daughter I will always love is learning inside the slow clock of accountability. A woman I look at in the mirror looks back like she recognizes me. I woke up to find my obituary on the front page of the paper. I went to sleep that night with my porch light on, and I have kept it on since. Not as a beacon, as a promise. A promise to myself that I will not be erased again, not by a form, not by a fear, not by a daughter who confuses wanting with deserving. If I am lucky enough to get old, and I hope I am, then I will get old loudly. I will keep telling one person and then another. I will keep a copy of my birth certificate in a lockbox and a copy of my courage in the kitchen drawer with the tape. If you are listening to this and you have felt a hand on your life that did not belong to you, hear me. You are not paper. You are not a form to be filled or a signature to be forged. You are the woman stirring her tea in the kitchen while it snows, and the neighbor will notice, and the investigator will arrive in boots white with salt, and the judge will listen, and the clerk will pull the proper seal, and the light will stay on. Tell one person, then tell another, and keep telling until the truth sounds like a bell over water in a morning, so still you can hear your own heart counting out the things you get to keep.